a best practice is if your grandma starts telling you about birds living in her mattress, you don't want to argue with her and try to correct her and say, Grandma, that's completely impossible. There's absolutely no way that birds would be living in your blah, blah, blah. You need to do what we call join their reality, because unfortunately, what we've learned over the last 3-4 decades is that no matter what you say to somebody who's having a false belief, you cannot change their mind.
You are now listening to the podcast where authors inspire listeners to become authors, the Going North Podcast. I'm your host, Certified Self-Leadership Trainer, best-selling author, and book enthusiast, Dom Brightman. And you're going to be listening to a different author that will inspire you to join the business of immortality, known as authorship. Now let the fun begin. This episode is sponsored by one of my favorite humans on the planet and one of the top listeners of this show, Stan the Man McCloskey, for his awesome audiobook, Divorce is Worse Than Death. You can check him out on episode 292.5. The link will be in the show notes. And also, yours truly is the voice behind the audiobook version of the book. So after you're done listening to this, or while you're listening to this, go on ahead, head over to audible.com. Click on the wonderful link, purchase that audiobook by yours truly, and support my man Stan. Now let's get on with the show. And today on the wonderful highlight reel builder for authors known as the Going North Podcast, we got another super special awesome human for you today, courtesy of the wonderful good buddy of mine, my man Robert B. Foster. Indeed, my man had a wonderful panel full of inspirational authors featuring yours truly and other wonderful authors, best-selling ones, no doubt. And I'm like, oh, this wonderful guest right here, she talks about freaking dementia. And for those who know the host and his caregiving journey, you're like, oh, well, it's no brainer, Dom, we get this lovely lady on the show, because today's featured author, y'all, she's a best-selling author, as well as a behavioral specialist specializing in Alzheimer's, a bunch of versions of the Alzheimer's, as well as advisor, public speaker, and a certified Dementia Care Trainer through the Alzheimer's Association. So let's give it up for Miss LS herself, the lovely and stupendous Lisa Skinner. How you doing today, Lisa?
Dom, I'm great. How are you doing? Hey, thanks for inviting me onto the show. This is a real pleasure.
Oh yeah, that's right indeed. That's right indeed. Especially when there's plums involved, as Les Brown would say, it'd be a plum pleasing pleasure. That's right indeed. Don't worry, pineapples can join in on the pleasure too. That's right indeed. But hey, it ain't about plums and pineapples. It's about the lovely Lisa herself. So my goodness, so since you've been on so many different podcasts, fun question for you. So if you were to describe your journey to the Lisa that you are today in 3 words, what would they be and why?
Never gave up. And the reason why I said that is because, well, that's kind of a 2-part answer. I have been doing this professionally for about 30 years. And before that, 20 years earlier, my very first experience with Alzheimer's disease was when my grandmother started doing some pretty bizarre things. I went to visit her one day and we sat down in the living room to have our usual visit. And out of nowhere, she started telling me about the birds that were living in her mattress and that they would come out at night and peck at her face. And then she proceeded to tell me and pointed to the walls about all the rats that were running around her house and invading her home, and they were just going to completely take over. Then she told me about these men that were constantly breaking into the home, and they were stealing her jewelry, and that they eventually had planned to do away with her. And I'm 16 years old, and I'm looking at my grandmother and thinking to myself, these are the most far-fetched stories I think I've ever heard. but I came from the generation where you don't argue with your elders, you don't contradict your elders. So I just kind of nodded my head and pretended like I was just kind of going along with everything she was saying. And then I said, well, Grandma, let's go into your room. I'm really curious to see where these birds are living. So we go into her room. I throw her covers off her bed, didn't see anything, pushed her mattress up, looked underneath, didn't see a thing. Not that I was expecting to. And I said, Grandma, tell me, I'm not seeing where they're getting in and out of your mattress. Can you show me? And she looks me straight in the eye and she says, oh, Lisa, they're there. They're just very, very clever. And that was a classic response from somebody who was suffering from what they called back then senile dementia, but it is synonymous with Alzheimer's disease. And I couldn't believe I was hearing these things. I went home and I asked my mother what was going on. And she told me that Grandma had senile dementia. And I said, why didn't you tell me? I go over and I'm listening to these, just unbelievable stories, but she just honestly believed they were true. She says, oh, we don't talk about those things. So then when I went to college, I decided I took a class in human behavior because I've always been fascinated in that topic. And I decided, okay, I want to make a career out of something to do with human behavior. At that time, I wasn't sure what it was going to be. But because of that experience with my grandmother and the peculiarities of the disease that I saw, and then since then have had 7 more family members develop one of the brain diseases that causes dementia, and a dog that suffered from dementia.
Oh.
I decided long ago that has got to be my calling. And there's been a lot of ups and downs in my career, a lot of really fulfilling moments and experiences. And then when I wrote my first book in 2015, I didn't really know anything about marketing a book. I had never written a book. It actually went #1 twice. It won a really prestigious award. But I have since learned that writing a book is only 10% of the work, and it's 90% of marketing efforts. Of course, I didn't know that back then. So where I'm leading with this story and is to answer your question, because I just was determined that this was supposed to be my lot in life. I have dedicated my world to helping others, family members and caregivers, so they would have an easier time going through this. This disease is so heart-wrenching. It's probably one of the hardest situations that any families or caregivers will ever take on. I just have felt that this is what I'm supposed to be doing. As a matter of fact, right before I wrote the book, I was called over to a client's house. She wanted to pick my brain about dementia. And we sat there for 2.5 hours, and she just kept asking me question after question after question, because her father-in-law had recently, about 2 years earlier, been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and her husband's mother had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And they were just so frustrated and at their wits' end, because in the 2 years that they had gotten each of those diagnoses, they were struggling to find information and answers of what to expect on a day-to-day basis. And they just were really struggling with this, and they just kept running into brick walls. She stops me after 2.5 hours and she says, Lisa, I just want to tell you that in the 2.5 hours that you've been here and having us pick your brain, you've provided us with more valuable information than we've been able to find or receive in 2 years. And I'm not saying
Wow.
this to blow my horn, because the next thing that came out of her mouth was my aha moment. She said to me, she says, well, you need to write a book. And the reason why is because so many people out there are like us and are so desperate for this kind of information. And it would be selfish of you not to share what you know. And the way she said that to me just was my defining moment. And it was shortly after that I just sat down and put pen to paper and wrote the book. And then I've written a couple more since then and helped thousands or counseled thousands of families. So my 3 words in response to your question is never give up, no matter what.
Hey, good words indeed, especially with that the darn evil disease, because it's like, yeah, you gotta have some darn determination and persistence to combat that as a caregiver. It's like crazy territory. It's gotta fight your wonderful norms that you're so used to norming about, and then it's like, wow, you made it your whole life mission. So, my goodness, has there ever been a time where you just got burnt out through all of the, I guess, wisdom you had to share over the years? Because I'm pretty sure it's probably a difficult topic having to go through it 8 times, especially with so many relatives.
Believe it or not, because I have also led support groups. And interestingly enough, I never get tired of helping other people. So no, I never have felt burnout, because the more people that I feel I've helped and maybe made their lives a little bit easier through this Alzheimer's journey of theirs, whether they're a caregiver or family member, it's been worth every minute of it to me. I feel like I'm just really doing something worthwhile and that's making a difference in people's lives. And they don't have to go through what that other family went through, just sheer frustration and not knowing who to turn to. So yeah, no, I never have actually.
Oh, well, that's good. She didn't need more wax. That's good. That's what I'm
No, I
talking
didn't.
That's what I'm talking about indeed. And so many other great things you mentioned earlier, especially with the writing process itself, basically being the whole 10% of it. So how's the other 90% of marketing the book and probably making adjustments as you went along? Or should I say writing the books?
Yeah, then that's actually a true statistic, which of course nobody told me at the time. I had to find out through the, School of Hard Knocks. But I absolutely think that those statistics are 100% true. It's not, the first step is writing the book, and then the rest of it is in marketing it. And I'm still figuring it out. So that's been my frustration is getting it out to people. But I know I mentioned to you before you started recording the show that I also have a podcast on this topic. So I hope that I'm getting to a lot more people than I was with just trying to get the book out there, because I think that I have a radio show too. It's called The Truth Lies in Alzheimer's Show. And I talk about everything under the sun that has to do with Alzheimer's disease, living with Alzheimer's disease, caring for people with Alzheimer's disease, because it's a very, very complicated illness. And it really takes specialized knowledge to navigate the heartbreaking challenges that come with it. And most people aren't aware of that. So hopefully my expertise and knowledge and helpful tools and best practices are reaching more people.
So I'm talking about indeed. I'm talking about indeed. So my goodness, I guess a common question probably for you, but a lot of folks tend to not know the difference. What's the major difference between Alzheimer's and dementia?
That's a great, great question. And it's a very common question. And unbeknownst to a lot of people, there's a huge difference. So let me explain that to you. Alzheimer's is a specific disease. It's a brain disease. Dementia is not a disease at all. It's really a broad term that's used to describe the symptoms that are caused by Alzheimer's disease or one of the other brain diseases that damages people's brains. And believe it or not, there are over 100 other brain diseases that cause dementia. So let me explain it to you in a way that people can really relate to. So we've all had a cold. Most of us have had the flu. And we know that we're coming down with something because of the symptoms that show up. So sometimes we get aches and body aches and chills and fevers, and we're stuffed up and we get sore throats. Not everybody has the same symptoms for a cold or for the flu. So we go to our doctor and we say, I really feel like I'm coming down with something. And the doctor says, what are your symptoms? So you describe them. And then we leave it up to our doctor to determine what type of virus we might have. So this is my best way of kind of differentiating between dementia and Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or one of the other brain diseases that causes dementia. So the dementia piece of it are the symptoms that are caused by the disease. So the hallucinations, like my grandmother had, the paranoia, like my grandmother had, the aggression, the personality changes, these are all symptoms of the brain disease as it's changing and damaging the brain. Dementia is the term that we use to refer to those symptoms. And everybody experiences these diseases differently. So you can have 100 people in a room that have Alzheimer's disease, and each one of them will probably display different symptoms and go through the stages at different rates. And people who have vascular dementia, same thing. So when you use the term dementia, you're really just using a broad-based term to refer to the symptoms that the disease is causing the people who are suffering from the disease's brain. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense indeed, because that's the thing that really gets folks confused, especially hearing some of your past interviews, the fact that over 100 other
Yeah.
possible head diseases can cause
I
the
couldn't even
darkness.
tell you what they all are. I mean, there's some more common ones. Alzheimer's is the most common brain disease that causes dementia, but there are a lot of them that exist. Oh, and the other thing that a lot of people aren't aware of is people also suffer from what we call mixed dementia. So they would be suffering from more than one of the brain diseases at the same time. So then things get really complicated because at least two areas of the brain are being attacked at the same time. And that's actually more common than people realize.
Wow. Wow. That's wow.
Mhm.
Definitely's got to suck indeed. And so my goodness, and the sad thing is that it seems like the cases just keep growing by the year. So there may be a growing population of caregivers for their elders and their relatives. So my goodness, any tips for caregivers or soon to be caregivers that they should consider that they don't always think about?
I can honestly, in the 50 years of experience, starting with my grandmother, and the 30 years I've been doing this professionally, my biggest takeaway in all that time, in talking to so many family members, is I've come to realize that the majority of people out there don't understand the disease. They don't understand what it's doing to the brains of the people who are suffering from the diseases. So my first suggestion, and probably the most important thing to do, is once you know that your loved one or that you're going to be caring for somebody with dementia, one of these brain diseases, is learn all you can about what this disease is going to do to that person. So you'll know what to expect, because things show up completely unexpectedly with no warning at all. Like, going over to have a nice conversation with your grandma and finding out birds come out of her mattress at night and peck at her face. Boy, did that bowl me over. These are just some of the things that you can expect to happen on a daily basis. So learn what to expect, learn what the disease is doing to the brain and how it's impacting every part of the brain, the loss of memory, the loss of reasoning, the loss of judgment, not being able to separate fact from fiction, and then all these behaviors that occur as a result of the changing brain. And then the second most important thing is to learn how to effectively respond to all of these situations. For example, a best practice is if your grandma starts telling you about birds living in her mattress, you don't want to argue with her and try to correct her and say, Grandma, that's completely impossible. There's absolutely no way that birds would be living in your blah, blah, blah. You need to do what we call join their reality, because unfortunately, what we've learned over the last 3-4 decades is that no matter what you say to somebody who's having a false belief, you cannot change their mind or change their belief in what they're saying. And by trying to do so, you can actually end up causing what we call a catastrophic reaction, which turns into a really ugly scene. And it's not really necessary to do that. It doesn't work anyway, but that is our gut response, our instinctive response, that we want to fix our loved ones. We want to fix people. We want to steer them back into our reality, what we believe is true, because we're healthy. But we've learned that that doesn't work, and it just causes more problems than are worth it. And so these are the things that I think are probably the most important things for caregivers to be aware of. The responses that are instinctive to us are counterintuitive to the responses that we advise people to use. The best practices, the proper approaches, the ones that we know work effectively. So it's really what it comes down to is retraining our brains to embrace their new worlds. We're not trying to force them back into our world or our reality.
Yep, definitely indeed, because yep, I'll be my dad at sometimes. He'd be having this crazy dream, and then sometimes he'd wake up and kind of one of those moments where it's like, oh, it just comes to for a second. It's like, oh, that was just my son helping me realize, oh, he was keeping me away from these certain objects that were poisonous.
Mhm.
But it's like there was nothing going on. It was just him in his room for bedtime. Oh man, oh man. So my goodness, so for I guess self-care, what's helped you to really keep your head above water when being a caregiver?
Well, I am actually not a caregiver, but I have done caregiving because I've had so many family members that have suffered. 5 of the 8 have been blood relatives. So I have helped out and had a role in caregiving. So I've been there, done that. I've had that experience. It is extremely difficult. So I have never really worked like in a memory care unit full time as a caregiver, but I've had enough experience to know the challenges, to have experienced those challenges, not just the book learning and the experience that I've gained over all these years, but the actual boots on the ground, in the weeds, hands-on experience of doing it myself. It's a difficult, difficult job. And it's probably one of the most difficult roles that anybody will ever take on, because you're trying to communicate with somebody who's lost their ability to communicate, and they have to find alternative ways to communicate with you. And these alternative ways manifest in the form of these behaviors that I mentioned. So you got to learn to recognize that when you're seeing these behaviors, they're trying to tell you something. They're not just trying to be difficult. They are truly trying to tell you something, but they can't articulate it anymore like they could when their brains were healthy. So being a caregiver is also somewhat like being Sherlock Holmes, being a detective, and having to figure out, and through the process of elimination, narrow down what's bothering them, what they need or what they want. That's a difficult challenge. It's like learning a new language to speak.
Yeah, definitely true indeed. Definitely true indeed. So you're right, folks. Learn a new language. Pick up a Snickers bar too while you're at it. That's right, indeed. Come back to Earth while you're in their world, and you're trying not to see everything in Japanese kanji with a cactus as your best friend,
Yeah.
and then a watermelon half on your head as a hat. So, my goodness, since your fellow podcast host, what are the top 3 lessons you've learned thus far from starting, running, and managing your podcast?
Oh, goodness. Oh, that's a growth process. I've been hosting I actually host 2 shows. One is a podcast and one is a radio show. The radio show, it's on Passionate World Talk Radio, which is an international network that broadcasts in 173 countries and has, I don't know, about 7 million listeners. But that's a radio show. And that one is exclusively about Alzheimer, living with Alzheimer's disease and dementia. So all of the brain diseases that cause dementia, and how to navigate that whole journey. The other one that I host with 2 other ladies is a historical show. It's also on Passionate World Talk Radio, but it's a podcast. And that one is all about the history of atrocities that have been done to mankind throughout history. So to give you an example, we've done a series on the Holocaust and on the genocide of the Native American people. And let's see, we're just starting a series on slavery, because the name of the show is Lest We Forget. And the whole reason why the show was called that is because we know through experience and through history that if you don't keep reminding people of the tragedies of life that have showed up throughout history, they'll be repeated over and over and over again. So we don't want people to forget about these things. But to answer your question, it's definitely, there's a huge, huge learning curve to doing this. You have to be prepared with what the information on the topic that you're going to present, and be able to speak about it in a way that people will relate to and understand and pay attention to, so they don't get bored and flip you to another channel. And you got to have a lot of energy to do these and have interesting content and have, a lot of energy, like you have, Dom, when you're talking. You're exuding a lot of energy when you're hosting your show, and that's really, really important. So knowing these things can make or break the listenership to your show, and it's definitely a learning process. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like one day you're a little pea in the pod, and then I don't know, you're a giant green bean. Then out of nowhere, it's like, oh, I'm almost a full cactus. And then the wonderful desert storm appears, and then you appear as a wonderful cantaloupe, and then you have to grow back into a wonderful tree.
Exactly. Yeah. And it takes practice. Practice makes perfect, right?
Ah, that's right, indeed. That good old practice, indeed. So, my goodness, so what are you excited about over the next 3 to 6 months? I know you probably got some big plans or something cooking in that magical brain of yours.
As a matter of fact, I do. I am about to launch a brand new training program that I have been working on for almost 2 years. And I'm going to launch it probably at the end of September. It's going to be available. I don't have a lot of the details yet. The program is written. And so people can learn what I feel is most of what they need to know. This is a long journey too. I don't know if people are aware of this, but the average length of time that people live with Alzheimer's disease and some of these other brain diseases is 8 to 15 years. It could move faster or progress faster than that. But like in the case of my grandmother, it was my first experience. She lived with it for 20 years, and that was not unheard of. So it's not something that comes and goes in a short period of time. This is a long, drawn out process, and it has a huge impact on everybody involved, the families, the grandchildren, the friends, the caregivers. There's a lot to know and there's a lot to learn. So I developed a training program that people will be able to access through a webinar format, that they can hear what I believe they really need to know about the disease, what's happening to their people, what to look for, and solutions. So they will have like a roadmap of how to get through this with as little stress and anguish as possible.
Ah, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. So you said it's written. Is it going to be an online course, or is it something folks have to go in person to see? What's the format looking like? At least the
It's going to
skeleton, I
be an
guess.
online course.
Oh, okay, cool. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's right, indeed. She's making the next step, y'all. Good old self-paced learning. You love to see it and be it. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. So that means we need to start leaving apples on your desk.
And then in addition to the training program, I am going to start up a virtual support group so people will have a safe place to go and have direct access to me and be able to, share their stories and be able to relate and resonate with other people that are going through this too. So that's going to probably be once a month. I haven't worked out the complete details, but it's going to be, like a full support program between the training modules and the support group.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, indeed. That's what I'm talking about, indeed. A good old support group. That's right, indeed. That's right. So Lisa's got us covered. So that means what happens in Caregiver Club stays in Caregiver Club.
Yeah,
That's right, indeed. No one talks about Caregiver Club.
no, it's a topic that people don't like to talk about, but it seems like everybody has a story about Alzheimer's disease. They just don't want to volunteer the information. But if you bring it up, they'll say, oh yeah, I've got a grandma with Alzheimer's disease with birds living in her mattress too. But she wouldn't, they won't confess to that because it still carries a stigma after all these years. Not changing very fast. A little bit since COVID, but not fast enough.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, indeed. That's right, indeed. It's like borderline, almost like them NSA employees. That's right, indeed. To be like, yeah, so I work for the NSA, right? And that's it. It's like, what? That's it? No stores, no nothing. It's like, oh, I have to tell you, I've had to kill you. And it's like, oh, okay then. Well, oh, Alzheimer's, yeah, that exists. Yeah, I can't tell you nothing. Oh man, but folks do remember the magical apples on your desk if she's got an online course, so she's being a wonderful professor online. So speaking of apples, a fun question for you. So if your fabulous book, Truth, Lies, and Alzheimer's, Its Secret Faces, if that book were a food, what would it be and why?
Caviar, because it is so valuable to people who are going through this situation. And it's a have to really have success. And like I said before, to get through it with as little stress and anguish as possible. And also to be able to provide a higher quality of life for the people who are suffering from it, a life filled with dignity and purpose and fulfillment. And that's part of what I teach is I call it person-centered approach to care, where you're really focusing on the people, the individual person, versus just exclusively the disease. So everything you do moving forward, you have that specific individual in the care plan, in your activity plan, in what you do and what you say. So that's part of what I teach as well.
Uh, didn't take no time for that answer. So indeed, somebody probably did their preparation. They're like, yeah, I know he's gonna ask that food question. I got some for him. So indeed, that caviar. There you go. That's right, indeed.
Well,
That's
if
right,
it was
indeed.
my personal food, I would say abalone because it's my favorite thing in the whole wide world. I don't care for caviar, but when you say caviar, people think of Rolls Royce and, the best of the best. So that's why I answered with caviar instead of abalone.
Well, I hear you. I hear you indeed. Because, hey, when it comes to your loved ones, it's got to be top of the line indeed. Definitely got to be top of the line indeed. And, hey, fish good for memory anyway or something like that. Just good for the body. The good old omega-3 oils. Good for something.
That's actually a really good question. There are many, we probably don't have time to go into it right now today, but I'll just mention real quickly. There are many, many, many risk factors that contribute to a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. There are risk factors that we call modifiable. In other words, they can be managed or changed. And there are risk factors that are non-modifiable, like age is the number one risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease. We can't change our age. We can't control that. So one of the modifiable risk factors is lifestyle choices and the foods you eat, the exercise you allow yourself to get are all very important contributions to minimizing your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease after you turn 65. And all of these things you can start today, even if you're 32. So knowing the risk factors, because the best way for me to explain it is the more of these risk factors that pertain to you individually, the higher risk you have of developing Alzheimer's disease. Let's say, just hypothetically, you had almost all of the risk factors that exist that we know of. Does that mean you're going to develop Alzheimer's disease? No. It's just putting you at a higher risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. But knowing there are things that you can do, choices you can make in your life that can lower that risk, who wouldn't want to do that?
Good deal. Good deal indeed. Yeah, because I have to say, probably my dad probably offset of the Alzheimer's by probably a few years by staying active, definitely. That was one of his biggest prayers in life after retired is to actually enjoy some life after retirement. And I say before the Alzheimer's, he really did enjoy a lot of life. So it all definitely worked out. So lifestyle is definitely huge, and probably keep them around people, keep them active. Right, indeed, help them keep their brains active. Indeed, somehow get their brains jump roping. That's right, indeed, something. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. Heck, maybe even take them to Lisa's website, tell them all about the stuff. Be like, hey, that's right, indeed. It's a good tool to know, but hey, let's not have to worry about using it just yet, or not at all. But still share with folks we know. That's right, indeed. Especially if they got blankets. So, my goodness, we're coming down to the magical question that every guest gets to receive. And that is, if you'd all wake up tomorrow and you're 25 again, but you're still in the current year, what advice would you give to yourself?
I would pay more attention and spend more effort and more time doing the things I know today that I could have done at 25 that would maintain my health and lower my risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Truly.
Woohoo! That's right, indeed. That prevention, baby. That's right, indeed. Good old prevention, better than remedy. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. We'll go that prevention route. Stay active. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. So we can live long and healthy on the earth. That's right, indeed. Live longer than 25,000 wiener dogs, y'all. Live a long life.
True.
There you go. Do you think that'll be enough wiener dogs to maybe cover Earth or half of Earth? 25,000 wiener dogs, maybe? Get them in a single file line somehow.
I mean, we can seriously do all these things and get struck by lightning tomorrow, but it's in God's hands anyway. So I think for me, there's definitely something to be said about you are what you eat. I know that for without any question at all. And then some of these other things that I've, learned, I probably would have implemented much sooner than my current age.
I guess. And then again, I don't eat enough cheese to be this cheesy, but hey, I guess it all works out. You are what you eat.
Well, at least you're not clogging your arteries, right?
Yeah, that's right indeed. Funny enough, don't eat all that much corn either, but I'm so corny. Who would have thought? uh, oh, shucks. Well, for those who need to avoid the corn and the cheese, even though being on this podcast is not doing that, folks need to keep up with your journey. So, for those who need to do just that and more, what's the best way for folks to do so, Lisa?
I have a blog on Facebook. So if you put into the search bar Lisa Skinner author on Facebook, I will come up. You'll find a lot of the information that I share with people. All of my podcasts for both shows are posted on my blog. You can find me at Passionate World Talk Radio. That's the network I'm on for both shows. Just go under either the host tab or the show tab and you'll find me. Oh, and you can find my books on Amazon and through Amazon, through the fine booksellers. And I also have just a really entertaining audio book that I'm very proud of. So if you like listening to audiobooks, I recommend that you perhaps listen to that format versus the book. I found just an amazing narrator who really keeps it light and makes it fun and interesting and doesn't make you nod off to sleep as you're listening to it. So that's pretty much how you're going to find me.
Oh, well, there you have it, folks. That's right indeed. So we're going to put links to all of the lovely Lisa stuff in the show notes. That way you can keep up with all the stuff that she's doing so you can buy some copies of her magical books for those in your networks who may be doing or going through the caregiving journey of Alzheimer's or may see some signs of it. And that way you can also be sure to subscribe to her podcast as well and be on the lookout for that online course. That's right indeed. So that way you can be ready when those parallel lines appear. That's right indeed. So you can go at the same time as the course. and be fully prepared. You'll have your magical six-pack abs of caregiver goodness and Alzheimer's awareness. That's right. That's right, indeed. You'll be aware like a AA battery called Alzheimer's awareness. That's right, indeed. That's right, indeed. Well, before a random camel appears, any parting words of wisdom before we close up shop, Lisa?
I really understand all of you who are experiencing this disease in your life, whether you're a caregiver or you have a family member. My heart goes out to everybody. And if I can be of any help to you at all to maybe make your world seem a little bit easier in this plight of yours, then please feel free to message me through LinkedIn or through my blog. So take care, everybody, and thanks for listening to us today. I hope this has been helpful.
If you're hearing this part of the episode, that means you're one cool individual. Thanks a bunch for tuning in, and if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to share it with at least one other person in your network. Bonus points for 3. And be sure to check out the backlog too while you're at it, because there are hundreds of wonderful episodes to choose from as well.